And today we have Sam Harris in his first ever Clubhouse conversation. So thanks for being here, Sam. Excited to get into it.
Yeah, pleasure. So where should we start?
Well, Sam, first I want to start with a topic that you've spent better part of a couple decades on the front lines of, and really just doing a lot of activism in the space. And there was actually some big news today that I know you've worked pretty hard to bring true to life, which is that Mr. Potato Head is now just Potato Head. And so was curious for your impressions and just based on the work that you've done there.
I don't think I followed the Potato Head controversy. He is now no longer a he. He's gender neutral.
Yeah. Yes. I believe the AP came out with a statement. I don't know if my sources want to comment.
I believe, Sam, the technical term is he is agender.
Well, he's a potato, so I don't care much. But So I've had my concerns about the spread of wokeness, as you know, and the effect it's having on speech. So I mean, perhaps
it's a good place to start. I mean, you just had your last episode with Ricky Gervais. Did you think a public intellectual like you would find common ground on atheism and wokeness with a stand-up comedian?
Well, yeah, that's not a surprise. I mean, he comes at this topic more or less from the same angle. I mean, the fact that he's a comic doesn't change much. I mean, he's obviously in the business of wanting to be able to say what he thinks, and I think he feels just as keenly as I do that it's mission critical that we maintain the freedom to do that, because it's, I don't think he thinks of it in quite these terms, but from my point of view, it is our only error correcting mechanism. I mean, if you're looking for what is going to keep us from sliding toward the abyss, it is successfully persuading one another about what we should do in each moment. What are the sorts of values we should converge on? What are our policies? What are the policies that are going to get us there? I mean, that's just we have to have open-ended conversation, and we're always going to be ambushed by things that are difficult to talk about. And if you have created a generation of human beings who are so allergic to the discomfort produced by impolitic topics, that they should not only shut the conversation down, but they just try to destroy everyone who was participating in it. It's really just the worst possible algorithm to be running, and as many people have noticed, it's the same algorithm that religions have traditionally used for similar reasons. I mean, we're living through a time of blasphemy tests and witch burnings, figuratively speaking, but not all that figuratively when you're talking about the complete reputational destruction of a person. So it's a big deal. I worry that all of us are a little too online, and it's magnifying the nature of the problem. I don't know if I include myself here. I don't know if I'm getting a distorted perception of how big the problem is, but there's no question it's a problem.
Sam, you said something really interesting there where you said we've created a generation. And I'm curious if you think this is something that exists is say the boomers versus Gen Z, or millennials are more, predisposed to this kind of wokeness that you've talked about. Is it a generational problem, or are you seeing it across generations, more akin to people who are very online or people who are in certain professions?
Well, it definitely crosses generations, but it is, at least I'm suspecting, much more a matter of older people being bullied and really having a lot to lose, right? I mean, the people are now getting very cautious with their reputations for understandable reasons, and this extends to comedy and really every public facing profession. So, but it's not that I got to think that the actual true believers in these new doctrines skew fairly young, but they have been indoctrinated by people who are now, my age and perhaps older, because these ideas have been around for a while.
And Sam, if you you're focused on how to fight this, I have two questions. One is in a pre-Trump era, there was sort of that boogeyman and I don't mean to sort of downplay that, but there was sort of the alternative threat. And now in sort of the post in a Biden era, do you think there's going to be more focus on, or is that your idea, that there'll be more focus on sort of like the single, challenge, or do you still see sort of this like equal, challenge on both sides as it relates to institutional capture or where we are there?
Well, leaving the Republican Party aside, the institutional capture seems to be all about the wokeness, right? I mean, that's what's vitiating the conversation for the most part in academia and journalism and tech, and those are the eggshells everyone is walking on. It's not that the alt-right or the far right or the neo-Nazis or even the new reactionaries in tech have much influence in institutions, or at least that's the way it seems to me. But I do worry that these two extremes are amplifying each other hideously at this point. I mean, this happened under Trump left. Certainly for someone like me, it was harder to go on and on about what's wrong with the intellectual dishonesty coming from the left when you have Trump, the great orange goblin over your shoulder, seeming to empower the worst tendencies of the right. Now, you can read the word "seeming" however you want. I think he's guilty of some of it. He's certainly not guilty of everything that has been alleged against him, but he's guilty of enough so that it really was just a high wire act that no one could successfully accomplish. You just can't persuade people on the left. It remains to be seen just how much we can persuade them even now, but it is easier having Biden in office, although unhelpfully Biden has been to some degree captured by the spirit of the times, right? So the way he uses the word equity, one wonders if he actually knows what he means by it. If you could have just inserted equality into that sentence and he would have been just as happy. But these buzzwords are doing an immense amount of bad work on the right, because they're checking all the boxes of paranoia. So for people who are worried that we're going to wind up in re-education camps run by Maoists, and it's just creating needless obstacles to rolling out vaccines or anything else that we should be doing right now. So things are by no means sorted out, but I do think getting rid of Trump is helpful, even though the far left may seem more empowered by that minor victory.
So can I ask, has anything surprised you in the last months since the transition occurred? Like, was it kind of what you expected to play out, that Biden would come in and of course he'd be using these words, but he did run as the moderate candidate and kind of won the nomination as the moderate candidate. Has anything surprised you, or is this sort of what you expected to happen in a kind of post-Trump universe?
I guess I was surprised by a few own goals that really just seemed completely unnecessary. Or just the fact that he framed his COVID relief plan explicitly in woke terms, basically seeming to say, I think it was in fact misrepresenting the actual policy, but he seemed to be saying that they would be targeting non-whites as a matter of principle. And that was just so inflammatory, and so it just, I'm I think as worried as anyone about the inequality in our society, and I would, but I think you should frame this in terms of wealth inequality and other forms of inequality that are real, and not use race or identity as a proxy for those problems. And it's not to say that something like wealth inequality isn't correlated with race; it absolutely is, but address the inequality, because everyone knows that you can find millions of white men who are not experiencing any kind of privilege right now. It's just, and so to parsing everything through the lens of white privilege and racial inequality, it's intrinsically toxic. I just don't see how we get beyond all the goodwill in the world is not going to get beyond the perception of toxicity here. And so I was surprised that he you know virtue signaled to the woke as much as he did. I was expecting more moderation in his public.
Sam, so one of my pet theories that I like, and I've assailed Mark with this more than once, is this notion of conservation of religion and taboo, whereby religion is never created nor destroyed, but only transformed. Obviously, a riff on the conservation of energy. And how much could you or would you credit, for example, the rise of wokeness or even political extremism on the right, either way you want to go, with the sublimation of certain religious impulses via political means? I mean, obviously, other writers, I think it was either Matt Iglesias or Sullivan, titled The Great Reawakening, right? And sort of in keeping with a lot of the religious revivals that have typified American life over the course of the past 2 centuries. I mean, I know you have strong feelings in religion, and I do mean to ask you about that, but would you even concede that there's that some of this is in some sense a sublimated religious urge?
Well, it definitely has a kind of religious dynamics, and that's, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't be too skeptical of that claim. I'm very skeptical of the claim that you can't get rid of religion and that it just moves. It's just this blob of dogmatism and superstition and taboo that just moves from the place you squashed it and arises elsewhere. That's not the way ideas work. I mean, no, you can get rid of specific ideas, and you can even get rid of whole institutions and norms and aspirations that were anchored to those ideas, and the world is often better for it, right? So it's just, no one is saying this about witchcraft, right? No one's saying there's a law of conservation of witchcraft, and there's no way to get out of this way of talking about the efficacy of magic spells. And you'll leave aside for a moment the similarity between witchcraft and traditional religion, which is obviously invidious and something that most religious people would want to disavow. But witchcraft is a belief in witchcraft and a disposition to organize your life around its reality is obviously entangled with religion and is as old as religion and still persists in various places, but it has been stamped out wherever science, and in particular medical science, has done a bit of good, right? And it's, so people are no longer imagining that they get sick because their neighbor cast the evil eye on them or cast a spell. And where you do find people behaving this way, but on the basis of these beliefs, it's so obviously pathological that no one's defending it, right? And no one's defending the caste system in India, right? I mean, if I criticize Islam and its beliefs, I'm immediately assailed. If I criticize the caste system, in India, which is obviously anchored to the religion of Hinduism and beliefs about karma and rebirth, I've yet to meet a defender of it. Actually, I've never encountered one in the wild. I'm sure I could find one in a philosophy seminar, but it's so the ideas and their motivations can fall under such disrepute that I do think they can be banished from the whole theater of our concerns, and we don't have to talk about them anymore. And I mean that there are many other things you could throw into this heap, and obviously, a point made by every atheist, you can throw thousands upon thousands of dead gods who nobody worships anymore. And even the religions that still exist, many of them, as they get mastered by modernity, are changing their truth claims. They're changing their basic orientation, and they've been they're just vast pieces of real estate in our lives that they no longer lay claim to. And where they do, it's not that they don't do this anywhere, but where they do, where you find parents in America denying their kids, medical operations because they have some cockamamie religious ideas about them. You know, the parents denying their kids insulin, right, and the kids die. There was a fairly recent case of that. It's just so it's tantamount to a confession of mental illness, right? Whether or not anyone is actually mentally ill. So I think we can make progress in any war of ideas, and I think we're seeing signs of progress in this one. But obviously this is an issue we'll be talking about, or people will be talking about, long after everyone in this room is gone. I mean, this is not going to happen in our lifetime, or at least I wouldn't expect it to.
Sam, I want to hear your predictions on where religion's going, because we constantly read, the Pew Forum always has that the nuns are the fastest growing category in the US, that the people are leaving organized religion, but spirituality and to your point, these sort of superstitious claims, things like astrology are growing categories, at least in Silicon Valley. The idea that people outside of the US too, organized religions and more superstitious religions are growing outside of the US. We had Tyler Cowen on the show last week, and he mentioned that he believes the next great leader of the US will likely be religious because of these trends. And I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on, perhaps organized religion is declining in the US, but are there other sort of veins of spirituality that are growing that have characteristics that we would historically, attribute to religion?
Well, I definitely would not count the theocrats out, even in the US, right? Yes, there has been a rise of the nuns. I'm not entirely sure who the nuns really are. I mean, most of them are not avowed atheists. I think the nuns are something close to 25% now in the US, and atheists are still around 3% or so. And part of that is just that atheism as a concept has such bad press that there are very few people who happily call themselves atheists, but many people functionally are. And the truth is, I'm that sort of person. I never thought of myself as an atheist. I've never spent 5 minutes worrying about the fate of organized atheism. I never used the term atheism or atheist in my first book, The End of Faith. And it wasn't that I suppressed the term, I simply didn't think in terms of atheism. I was just thinking in terms of the collision between science and superstition and reason and faith. And I want to talk about things like evidence and common sense and plausible beliefs and what it takes to be in touch with reality. So atheism as a political movement, I've always viewed as fairly stillborn, right, and fundamentally unnecessary. A point I've made many times before. You don't have to call yourself a non-astrologer to see what's wrong with astrology and to reject it as an organizing principle for your life. And you don't have to go to conferences on non-astrology to motivate that whole conversation. You just, every time you see astrology invading our public policy, or you see people running on a platform of astrology hoping to get elected to the presidency, well, then you push back against how ludicrous those beliefs are. But you don't have to define yourself in terms of their of opposition to them. So I'm much more interested in the frontiers of science and reason generally, and intellectual honesty, most generally, right? Just how we can not pretend to know things we don't know, and remain anchored to the norm of doing that, and how we can become more sensitive to how unseemly it is that so few people are actually anchored to that norm. So I think it's as far as where this is all headed, it is obvious, certainly in the U.S., that sincere religious belief is inversely correlated with education and wealth, right? So as you skew for greater wealth and greater education, you find more and more of the nuns and more of the atheists and more Hindus. Actually, Hindus are, I think, the most well-educated and wealthiest cohort in our society, and then the Jews. But you do begin to lose religion as life gets better and better, and that's not an accident, right? And that's but that's not also, it's not to discount the things that people have traditionally gotten from religion or think they were pursuing under the aegis of religion that are in fact necessary to human well-being. I don't take religion seriously. I don't think anyone should, but I take mysticism seriously. I take contemplative spirituality seriously. I mean, just what are the furthest reaches of human well-being, and how can we explore them more and more? I think that's a real project that we should take seriously, and it is just in fact descriptively true of our world that most of the people historically who have taken that project seriously have done it in the context of one or another religion. And so it is with many other things like, community or even ritual. I mean, we want these things, but again, I think we don't have to lie to ourselves about the nature of reality, or about specifically about the divine origin of certain books, to have any of that. And that really, that it just comes down to, again, you don't have to define yourself as an atheist, and I never think of myself as one. I mean, atheism is a noun that almost never appears in my mind. Um, but you just have to look at the claims that are being made and have to be made by the various cults and religions on offer, and ask yourself how plausible they are, right? And every one of the major religions, and certainly the Abrahamic ones, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, is anchored to the claim about that a specific book was written or inspired by an omniscient being. And that is, that if anything is obviously implausible, it's certainly that, given all that we've come to learn in the last 2,000 years. So, and that's all you need to demolish the pretensions to ultimate truth that come from those faiths. And so it's you can be completely disruptive of those projects without ever even knowing that organized atheism was a thing. And that's actually how I stumbled into all of this when I wrote my first book.
So, Sam, a couple comments there. So it's funny that you mentioned that so many religious concepts are in the past, things like, paganism and witchcraft. And, the people who would most strongly agree with you are, in fact, Catholic priests and Jewish rabbis, right? They view their flavor of ethical monotheism actually as progress over that, right? So when I was calling out, for example, wokeness as a religious concept, you have to look at it in terms of the religious tradition from which it emerges, right? This didn't come from animism or Asian ancestor worship, right? It came from a very Judeo-Christian origin, specifically a very Protestant origin, right? And there are many who have drawn a direct line between, social progressivism in the past was an evangelical Christian phenomenon, right? It was a Protestant Christian phenomenon. And suddenly it's an elite secular phenomenon. So you cite the nuns category, but when I say religion, I don't literally mean like a mainline Anglican church, or what's it called in the United States, Episcopalian, right? I mean a religious mode of thought, right? Which you can call yourself a nun and yet believe in that religious thought, right? And so and then in terms of the literal belief of God, not to be pedantic about it, but there's actually strains of Judaism that actually don't even accept that, right? Like Reconstructionist Judaism does not believe that God actually gave the Torah to Moses on Mount Sinai. And right, I think one place that a lot of not to paint with too broad a brushstroke here, but I think one place where the sort of new atheist philosophy goes a little wrong is that it gets stuck in this Galileo mode of the truth claim, when I think at least most modern intellectuals in either the Judaic or the Catholic tradition have kind of gotten over that hang up a long time ago, and they're no longer making truth claims, right? I understand that in the US, the exposure to the Christian thought is typically evangelical Christians who do indeed take over some school board in Texas and try to pass creationism or whatever. And that's one flavor of it. But I wouldn't say it's straw manning exactly, because it does exist. But that is just one challenge to this thought, right? And one thing you said, it does seem like from what you said that you do appreciate the community building and the feeling of shared narrative and mysticism, the feeling of communion with something either divine or numinous in some way that religion can create, right? And I think that's another thing that's worth distinguishing. One is, I think you're really focusing on the sort of orthodoxic side. Do I believe that Jesus is the Son of God and died for my sins, versus the actual practice of it, which I think we got into a little bit in yesterday's show, right? Where like it doesn't, in some sense, if everyone comes together and has a Yom Kippur service and has a meaningful experience around a shared set of narratives that they believe in, it doesn't matter if God exists, right? That experience was a very real unifying one, right? And I guess my last point, and I'll shut up there, is that, and here I want to get into some of the points you made in your book, The Moral Landscape. You know, everywhere in life, we are forced to make metaphysical claims about things, right? The United States of America, right, is a civilization built around a document, just like Judaism, right? And it is a document passed down by prophetic founders that's interpreted by a pseudo-rabbinical court called the Supreme Court of the United States. And that is a major part of our public life, which is why our public